to Crimson Chronicles. I'm Tommy Ford alongside my co-host, Rick Morton. Today we're joined by two legends from one legendary family, Jeff and Gary Rutledge. Jeff and Gary's dad, Paul Jack Rutledge, not the longtime assistant football coach at Alabama, played baseball for the Tide in the late 40s, and Gary's career as an Alabama quarterback spanned from 1970 to 74, while Jeff came a year later in 75 and was a three-year starter for Alabama in 76, 77, and 78. Their careers spanned the days of the Wishbone, which we'll get into in a little while, and Coach Bryant's last decade at the capstone. Gary and Jeff, it's always good to see y'all, and we've got time for jokes if you want to give us a few, but it's up to you.
No, this is not the right place for that.
Oh, that shocks me, Tommy, because when you tell him to tell you a joke, he usually pulls them right out.
No,
Apparently, we're going to have a serious episode tonight, Tommy, so I'm not sure how this is going to work. But, guys, welcome to the podcast. We're glad you're here. Just excited. And so, your dad was at the university. My dad was there at the same time back in the 40s. And so, as he played baseball, he obviously was an athlete, brought that to both of you early on. What were some of your earliest memories of football and backyard competitions between the two of you and maybe with the kids around the neighborhood?
well, for me, Jeff and I never competed anyway because I was 4.5 years older than him. So we had different friends in our neighborhood. But I can remember always home about 4:45 every day, 10 to 5, somewhere in there. And I'd be waiting on him with a baseball or a basketball or a football. But football, for me, he was a punter in high school. So he taught me how to punt. And I punted at Banks when I was there. And then he also taught me how to throw a football. So Dad taught both of us, taught us how to play sports. He asked me to fix something or put something together or hammer something together. I could do anything, but most of the sports I was decent at anyway.
Well, my
Jeff.
dad was, from the time I can remember, we were outside playing with a ball of some sort. Whatever season it was basketball, we were out shooting hoops, and then it would be, it's time for dinner, and you would go, oh, I got to make so many more free throws, and then they'd be yelling at you, if you don't get in here, you're going to get in trouble. So you would go running down the hill and get into the house. And same with football out in the front yard. The big game back when I was a kid was we played smear. You throw the ball up, whoever caught it, and you
can't finish that total title, can you?
No, well, we called it smear back in the crazy thing. And Gary remembers her. Cindy Neal lived across the street. That was Mike and Rick Neal, who both played at Auburn. Was tougher than most of us as boys, and she was right in the middle of it. It was crazy. And of course, some of the guys in the neighborhood, you throw it to her, and of course they want to go tackle her. But Cindy, she was a great young lady, but she was a great athlete.
Yeah. Hey, was there ever a time when your dad used one of you to motivate the other, like maybe any kind of contest? Or I know, Gary, you were 5 years older than Jeff or so, 5 grades at least. But were there any times when he kind of pitted y'all against each other or against one another?
I don't remember. How about you, Jeff?
No, I really don't. I mean, Dad just poured his heart into both of us, wanted us both to succeed, but he never said, well, Gary did this or Jeff did that. It was just, he pulled for both of us, and Gary and I, we were each other's biggest fan.
He wanted us to be baseball players, because he played for the Chicago Cubs for many years. And when he got pregnant with me, he got out of baseball. But I remember we played Little League ball, and if I took out or made an error, he would get me out, and I'd want to ride home with Mom and not Dad. In the car, son, you ride with me. And he wouldn't let up, And then basketball, playing at Banks High School, I could hear him echo in the gymnasium, shoot the ball, Gary, shoot the ball. And the coach didn't want me to shoot the ball. We were running plays, And Dad was just very intense about sports. And he just, like Jeff said, he wanted us to succeed.
a good story about Dad, and Gary, I sure remember this, but Dad would, if you go up to the bat and he struck out, and then you always wanted to ride with your mom home, but he'd give you the old phrase, you couldn't hit me if the woods were full of 'em. And
No, it was more, you couldn't hit me if I walked across.
It can then walk across the plate. And I remember one time telling him, well, walk across the plate and see if I can't hit you. And that was the wrong thing to say. But I remember but Dad always used to chew the umpires out. They did not like my dad. He'd go, and then I remember Gary's watching me play, and Dad got in an argument with one of the umpires, and that guy pulls his mask off and says, Jack Rutledge, I've had enough of you, and goes toward my dad, and Gary comes out of the stands and bear hugs this umpire. So my dad was intense, and obviously it rubbed off probably more on me than it did Gary, but I was that way as well.
Well, you know, we've established that you guys were 5 grades apart, and so you didn't play on teams with each other, but both of you at different times, there was a point where it became clear that you were going to have the opportunity to be able to play quarterback in college. Can you talk a little bit about when that moment happened for each of you, and you know, what do you remember about realizing that you were going to have an opportunity to be able to go on and play college ball?
You go first, brother.
Well, I guess that's a good question, because I never really thought of myself as a college prospect. So, you know, I guess my senior year, back in those days, I wasn't really recruited very highly. And I don't know, I had a good senior year, and a couple of colleges came in, but I only had 2, maybe 3 come after me. So I didn't really realize that I was good enough. I just know I wanted to go to Alabama. You know, Dad took me and Jeff to ball games. I remember sitting under a tarp watching Kenny Stabler run in the rain, a touchdown, and just he took us to all kind of games all the time in football. And I just knew that I wanted to play for Coach Bryant. So I pretty much told everybody I wanted to go there, so nobody really recruited me. And luckily, they did offer me a scholarship, and luckily I turned out okay. But that was the only place I ever wanted to go.
Well, for me, I was fortunate. I got recruited, got some offers by a lot of schools, but when it came down to it, I narrowed it down between Alabama and LSU. And the main reason it was LSU is they were running the same offense that I was running at Banks High School, running the veer, throwing the ball, 15, 20 times a game. And Alabama, like Gary said, was not throwing the football much. And I was really considering going to LSU.
I know both of you had great careers at Banks, and Jeff, obviously here we are 50 years later, and the folks are still talking about the Banks Woodlawn game and the stories that have come out of that game, and the movie Woodlawn, and the 42,000 or whatever it was at Legion Field that night, and Tony Nathan and Jeff Rutledge, and people still talk about it. It's been, over 50 years ago. And I think you mentioned wanting to go to LSU, or at least was that, Gary, for you, Alabama was kind of the only spot, but Jeff, you were recruited. I know you narrowed it down to Alabama and LSU, but there were probably a lot more schools. Why did you end up picking Alabama, each of you?
Gary, go first on this.
Well, he's asking you the question.
Okay.
I know the answer to why you Alabama.
No, I had like to narrow down to Alabama, LSU. They were running the same offense, and Coach Bryant, you've heard this story, Tommy, I think before, but I've got to tell it because I was really seriously considering going to LSU, and I get a call at 9:00 at night, and it's Billy, who was Coach Bryant's driver. And he said, Jeff, this is Billy, Coach Bryant's driver. He wants to come by and see you. He just got out of a touchdown club meeting. He won't be there more than 5 minutes, but wants to come by and see you real quick. So I asked Mom and Dad if he could come by, and sure enough, he comes by. And Coach Bryant smoked the old Camel cigarettes, and he gets in, sits down, and he looks at my mom. He said, Miss Rutledge, you mind if I smoke? And he gets him an ashtray, puts it there. He likes it, and he starts puffing on it. And instead of using the ashtray when it was time to get his it goes onto my mom's carpet, and she jumps up and goes over there and cleans it up. And all Bryant does, he looks down, he goes, oops, sorry. and then, and I could tell she was upset. And then he looks at me and said, "What's this I hear about you going to LSU?" And I said, "Well, coach, they're running the same offense I'm running at Alabama." I said, "I mean, at Banks," I said, "They're throwing the football. You're not throwing the football at Alabama." And he all of a sudden he said, "You want to win a national championship, don't you, son?" I said, "Well, of course I do, coach." He said, "You won't win one there." He gets up, takes my hand, shakes my mom and dad's hand, and says, "Sorry about that carpet, Miss Rutledge," and leaves. And he wasn't there 5 minutes. And so when he leaves, though, my mom wasn't real happy still about the carpet. And so but when it all came down to it, there was no question. Of course, parents, when they get involved a little bit, it was, now, if you go to LSU, it's an 8-hour drive for us every Saturday, but we'll be there. We'll be at as many games as you can. And then Gary White was who ended up recruiting me the hardest from Alabama, who was the academic coach and the head of FCA. And then I remember telling Coach White, "Hey, I'm coming to Alabama," and it was by far the right decision.
Well, as a follow-up to that, Jeff, you saw play for 3 or 4 years prior to you coming, and they were running the Wishbone, and in '73, we still hold records from an offensive standpoint. So you saw that it could spread wings and throw the ball a lot in the Wishbone, but in '74, Gary's last year, we kind of went back to the more traditional Wishbone. So you knew that we could throw it out of the Wishbone, but I didn't know if that had any sway in your decision.
Well, when you ask Coach Bryant, if I come to Alabama, will you throw it more? And his response was, "Not if I don't have to." And so he told me he's not going to throw it any more with me than he is with anybody else. But as it ended up, I did throw more than any other Wishbone quarterback did when I was there, and won the national championship. And so it was by far the right decision. It's just, and you go to Alabama, and I wasn't thinking pro football. I mean, I really wasn't. I went down there as like, how can I make a name for myself here at Alabama? Let's win a national championship. And then I was as shocked as anybody when I graduated, at Alabama. And, I'm getting calls from pro teams wanting to come work me out. And that's the first time I really even thought about playing pro football.
Yeah, we had Keith Pugh on last year, and he said that the other team knew when y'all were going to throw the ball because he would come out of the huddle turning somersaults.
And which is true, and Gary knows. And if we didn't call it, get Coach Moore to call a pass play was pretty tough. But he gave us the opportunity from time to audible. And one year I had Ozzie Newsome sitting out there 1-on-1, nobody in the middle of the field. They had Keith out there 1-on-1, nobody. So you'd see that, and you would just check 1-8, 1-8, which was the post pattern, and then it'd be wide open. You throw a touchdown, and you think, okay, maybe we'll throw a little more. But if you tell, a lot of my throws were from audible.
Same for me. Well, several times. Johnny Sharp was one time in a pass touchdown, and Jodell Harris one time he fumbled running into the end zone doing it. But they gave us that opportunity. But yeah, Jeff didn't want to go to Alabama because I told him, I said, "Jeff, I throw it maybe 6, 7 times a game, 8 times a game. You're a passing quarterback, I would suggest going somewhere else. You got a chance to play professional football." Again, mom and dad had a large part of his decision.
Was it just that you were going to be closer and your mom and dad were going to be able to see you, or was there more to it than that as far as they're wanting you to go to Alabama? Was it more heritage?
Yeah, it was more here. I mean, I grew up, Tuscaloosa, 45 minutes to an hour away from Birmingham. I knew mom and dad would be at every game I played if I did go to LSU, or do their best to get there. But at Alabama, I knew they would be. And then even on the away games, they were there. And it means a lot. I mean, the fact that dad went there, played there, and I grew up an Alabama fan. Came down to it, there was really not much question where I was going.
Well, back to the Wishbone, Gary, you were there. Even though you were redshirted in '71, you witnessed the transition to the Wishbone. You were there in '70 as a freshman, did really well as a freshman team quarterback. Back then there were JV squads or freshman teams. And what do you remember about that time? I know had one kind of offense in 70, we the varsity, I guess. And then in 71, Coach Bryant comes to y'all and says, we're going to swap to the Wishbone. What are your memories of that?
My memories are he told us, and we're going to sink or swim with the Wishbone. He said that I don't want you to tell anybody that we're going to the Wishbone. It was total secrecy. That was the amazing thing to me. He didn't want us to tell our moms, our dads, our girlfriends, our best friends, anybody we were going to the Wishbone. We, when we were practicing the Wishbone, of course, we couldn't practice in the indoors, and so he had all the managers go across the street and get up on the roofs and in an apartment, make sure nobody was watching us practice. And we went to the Wishbone. And when scout riders back in those days, they came in a bus to every SEC school. Coach Bryant had us run the old offense while they were there. We were in pads and shorts and pads, but they had up that old offense in front of all the sports writers. So nobody knew we were going to go to the Wishbone until they got to Southern California. And we took the lead, of course. The first half, scored all our points in the first half, and didn't score any more, but we ended up winning the game. So it was a total surprise and total secrecy.
Which
Well,
today couldn't happen with social media. It would be on the 5 o'clock news. Yeah, today if they tried to change something.
Yeah, no, another thing I was a part of, you probably were going to ask me about it, but I was at the Wishbone, but also when we first became integrated, when Wilbur Jackson and John Mitchell came. So many times wished I could die of things that went on down there in the dorm and things of that nature. To be a part of that as well while I was at Alabama was quite the honor.
Gary, we've had several folks that have come on and talked about that transition to the Wishbone in different ways. But one of the things I don't think anybody's talked about is as you were keeping the secret and you guys began to understand what was going on and that Coach Bryant was really, he was going to pull a fast one in that first game. Was there an excitement within the team? Did that add to kind of your enthusiasm and your ability to come out to play that game well, or their ability to play that game well because you just realized what you'd pulled off?
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement going into that game, as I recall. Of course, I was redshirting. I didn't make the trip. I think Butch Hobson backed up Terry Davis at that time. But I just remember it was an exciting time. We weren't sure though how it would work. We never ran the offense. We run it. I don't remember how many times we were live in a scrimmage to run it on national TV. Well, I don't even know if it was national TV, but it was something that we hadn't really worked on. We didn't have a lot of confidence in, and to go out and to actually against one of the top teams in the country. We were excited, but also probably a little bit scared.
Well, folks, we're excited that you're listening to the Crimson Chronicles podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. Grab your title towel from Whitwell Sports. Use the code TWO for a discount. They'll be excited to send you one, and they'll get it there by this Saturday so you can wave it around as you cheer for the Tide. Tommy?
Yeah, speaking of waving towels, I went to the South Carolina game and we saw plenty of that. All game long between Sandstorm and waving the towels. Man, it drove us crazy, but thankfully we pulled out a win. But let me ask y'all this. I know, Jeff, you've already told us about your experience with that 5-minute conversation and visit with Coach Bryant in your house, but once both of you got to school, what kind of interactions did y'all have with him for you to know that he was a different kind of guy?
Jeff, go on. You take that one.
The quarterback obviously had more time with Coach Bryant than anybody else, but even though we didn't have a ton, he did spend more time with us. But it was just growing up an Alabama fan, Bear Bryant, you wanted to do everything you could to please him. You didn't want to tick him off. I know that because he could. You'd be out on the practice field and he'd start coming down out of that tower, and you knew he was coming after somebody. The crazy thing, you didn't know if he was coming after a coach or you didn't know if he's coming after you. Gary knows he used to come down and get on the mouse sometimes. So But Coach Bryant was hard to talk to. I say it's hard to talk. It wasn't somebody you wanted to go, let me go sit and talk to Coach Bryant and ask him about this. I mean, that would be for the last person, at least for me, that I wanted to go talk to. I would go talk to Mal or I'd go talk to Coach Bryant just because I'm scared of Coach Bryant. But yet, in team meetings, Coach Bryant would say things that to this day I remember talk kids about the things that I remember him telling us as players when he would come into our team meeting.
Gary?
Well, same thing. We'd get closer to him every game. He'd have a walk with the quarterbacks. He'd always take that little trip around the swimming pool at a motel. There'd be 4 or 5 of us quarterbacks. He wanted us to say the same things every week. Have poise and confidence was his big thing. Don't argue with the referees. Jeff can tell you 2 or 3 more of them, but he wanted you to take charge in the huddles. Don't talk back to the officials. Similar things. He wanted you to show class and not be a bad sport. Help another guy off the turf that he had fallen down or something. They just wanted to show class. Coach Brown was a good one and a good loser. The times he did get beat, he would give to the other team and the coach and so forth. So he taught us how to be a good winner and a good loser. I was just honored to be a part of it. I never thought I'd get that far, to be honest.
I think as we talk to players that played for Coach Bryant, one of the things that really sticks out is how everybody has talked about him being able to get the best out of his players, and that no matter who the team was. How did that work for you individually? How did he relate to you individually, and how did he draw the best out of you?
Well, you didn't want to disappoint Coach Bryant. I mean, something about him, he always, you wanted to give you your 100%. I mean, he'd rather see a guy that had gave 150% than a guy that had a lot of talent and gave 75%. He wanted somebody who was going to hustle. And he'd always say, you play like you practice. You got to practice hard. You got to practice to win. You want to get better every day, every practice. And you think about that in anything in today. If you loaf in practice, you're going to loaf in a game. You got to give it all you got. So he taught us a lot of things like that really stick with me. My profession, when I was a salesman, I'm only as good as I can be. If I don't work, I'm not going to be any good. So you got to go out there and do the job and work hard. And that's what we did in practice. He worked it and made us work.
And in building a leg, I mean, it's something that I always used to say, he said, don't let anybody ever outwork you. You don't have to have talent to give effort. So don't let anybody ever outwork you. And there were times where guys were loafing and he'd be up there in his tower and he's yelling at those guys and get them out or send them in. You did not want Coach Bryant to have to call you out for not giving effort. I mean, and I know from playing and from then getting into coaching, I mean, it used to drive me nuts when I was coaching. The kids would not give effort. I mean, I would say, Coach Bryant used to say, you don't have to have talent to give effort. Give it everything you have. I mean, and that's no matter what that is. Everybody's got different abilities, but if you're giving everything you have, then that's all you can do. And I'm going to say, great job. But it's when you're not doing everything you can do and not giving it everything you've got, then you deserve to be chewed out.
I can remember a lot of times Coach Bryant would be, all of a sudden he would be out of the tower. And you're not going to turn around and try to find him because he might be right behind you. So you could almost look out your ear hole and twist inside to find him. But, I would be calling the plays, and back in our day in the huddle, it was like a choir lock. All of them were right here, and they're looking at me. And so normally when I call a play, they would just listen, with a normal bold face. But all of a sudden, I could see them look like this, like they were into the call. He was standing right behind me. And they didn't have to explain it. They were scared of him. I think Coach a little bit. Clearly highly respected of him. But if you ever saw him lose his temper with a player, you didn't want that happening to you.
Yeah, we've interviewed several people, and I worked with Coach Dude Hennessy for a good while, the Tide Pride office, and of course Mal was my athletic director. And you mentioned Coach Bryant's name, and they'll start shaking. I mean, they were all scared of him. I got one question for y'all. We've asked Ronnie Robertson and Stedman this, but as you know, there weren't many games on television back then before all the NCAA and TV rules changed. So the time that most of y'all were able to see highlights of the game was Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock on the Bear Bryant show. So did y'all watch it? And if you did, tell us why. And if you didn't, tell us why.
I
Jeff?
100% watched it because I wanted to know when I went in the next day or when we had our first meeting, what was going to be said. I wanted to know if Coach Bryant, yeah, that's a good, bingo. That's how he used to do. And I wanted to know what it was going to be like at the meeting and know what Mel was going to say. And as a player, if you played well, if you didn't, and it was sort of like if you played well, you were wanting to see if he was going to say how well you played, because you knew he was going to say if you didn't play well, he's not going to say he didn't play well, but he's going to not a good decision by Jeff. We got to get better. But I watched that show every Sunday. Yes.
And I did too. I watched it every Sunday for the same reasons. You wanted to know how you played, what he thought of how you played. Based on what he said, you could tell what the next week was going to be like in practice. A lot of times he would take credit for the loss. Come practice time, he'd blame it on the players with tough practice.
Well, it was certainly a cultural phenomenon. Well, next time, guys, we're going to talk about defining moments, leadership, and the Rutledge family legacy.
All right, stick around. We'll be right back with more from Jeff and Gary Rutledge. But right now, if you want to hear that, subscribe so you don't miss part 2. And don't forget to check out Yay Alabama, the official NIL collective of Crimson Tide Athletics.